going to ask Kaia Hodge to come up as our next guest. Now, Kaia is the manager of the Liveable Cities program for Sydney Water. What does that mean? She's in charge of trying to figure out how do we water a global metropolis like Sydney. Now, just stop and think about that for the moment. I don't know if anybody else in the room, who out there is willing to admit in front of a group of people like this that at some stage they played SimCity? Come on, I'm not on my own. Get your hands up, thank you, all of those people. If you're anything like me, I was unable to water a few square meters of virtual houses on my aging computer, let alone something the size of a city that we've got. So it's a significant challenge, and one that we don't often think about. And it's infrastructure related. Now, I don't know about you, but anytime I meet somebody who's got something to do with infrastructure and state or federal government, I ask them if they watch Utopia. Most of them say some version of, it's not a show, it's not a comedy, it's a documentary. Kaia's face fell and she said it's a bit of a horror show. She does watch it. However, and this is why she's here tonight, she absolutely loves water. Please welcome Kaia Hodge.
Good afternoon, everyone. Managing water for a global city like Sydney is about more than balancing supply and demand in the face of population growth and climate change. And it's about more than stringing up a bit of plumbing, if only it was as easy as that. It's actually about managing all of our resources, all of the things that we use and recover through water management. And it's also about being very clear about the role that water plays in creating our cities. This is the tank stream. Today it lives under the streets and buildings of Sydney. But from the time of European settlement, it was Sydney's first life stream. It determined where the city was established. In the late 1880s, had a serious problem. Water supply from botany wetlands was failing and sanitation was extremely poor. 1 in 10 children didn't make it to the end of their first year of life, and 1 in 20 died before they were 5 years of age. Water and sanitation is fundamental to a city. 1889, and the Board of Water Supply and Sewerage gets established. It sets about the task of establishing reliable water supplies, initially from the Upper Nepean, later on Warragamba. It sewers the city, it sewers our growing suburbs. Ultimately, it gets the sewage off the beaches. Sydney today has its livability underpinned by reliable clean water and good sanitation services. And really that's something that's to be proud of, because many international cities are still to achieve that. But it's about more than that as well. It's also about the more diversified approach that we've taken in recent years to balancing supply and demand. We rely on dams, recycling, desalination, and of increasing importance, we rely on water efficiency. Did you know that we use the same amount of water today as we did in the early 1970s? And that's despite there being 1.7 million additional people living in Sydney. We've hardwired water efficiency into our homes and into our appliances, but more importantly, we've changed our behaviours. And did you know that since drought restrictions have been lifted, that we haven't had an increase in consumption in Sydney, which isn't the case in Brisbane or Melbourne. So whether or not that turns out to be a long-term thing and why that's so remains to be understood. But managing water is not just about the water, it's about the other resources we use. Energy is a huge component of water management. We use over 400 gigawatt hours per year. That's the equivalent of 60,000 homes to manage our water and wastewater services. But did you know that 20% of our energy needs are met through things like biogas that's recovered from our wastewater treatment processes and hydropower? And did you know that we've been able to keep purchased electricity below 1998 levels, and we propose to do so in the long term? And not all of our perceptions about water management options are always correct in terms of energy use either. For instance, did you know that a large part of Sydney gets pretty much a free ride in terms of energy because the water supplies are very much reliant on gravity through the central Sydney suburbs? It's not the case on the periphery, on our outer suburbs. The water intensity of water management there is more akin to a rainwater tank in a household or local recycled water options. Of course, desalination we know is incredibly energy intensive. It uses about twice as much energy as the other options. But we do tend to forget as a community that in the case of Sydney's desal plant, we've invested in renewable energy for exactly that reason. So we shouldn't assume that the best solutions or any one solution are the same in any part of Sydney. We need to remain open to the fact that different solutions will be better for different areas. Overall, what we're trying to do is to get the balance right, how we manage our water as well as how we manage the energy and the materials that it requires to do so, to shrink that footprint and to keep it restrained. I get very excited about the energy that we can recover from wastewater, and that's probably sad really, but anyway. Did you know that in the wastewater that we discharge, there's 2.5 times the embedded energy as the amount of energy that we need to run all of our water supply and sewage systems across Sydney? Now, did you also know that Bondi Sewage Treatment Plant is currently 90% energy self-sufficient and Malabar is around about 70%? And with the R&D that we're doing at the moment, there's a very real prospect of them being energy neutral in the short term and with the capacity to export electricity or gas back into the grid. Sydney in 20 years, we're going to have another 1.3 million people here. Now, the majority of them are going to be in infill areas, about 70%, and that doesn't cost us a lot to service because of the water efficiency that we've achieved. We can put more people onto those systems. But we've got a disproportionate amount of investment in greenfield areas. It takes 80% of the cost of servicing in those areas for Western Sydney and the Illawarra. So these are the areas where there's real potential to do things fundamentally differently and from scratch. We tend to have polarised arguments about decentralised versus local solutions, but it doesn't really take us anywhere to say that one's always better than the other. My view is that we'll have combinations of centralised and network systems going forward. And water management is about more than just resource management. It's also about water, how water supports the livability of our cities. And we need to think about that. We need to envisage it, we need to plan for it, and we need to make it happen. My view is that we have a pretty good idea of how water supports the livability of the eastern suburbs, but what about the west? I think that there's a real risk that we can create very inhospitable and vulnerable communities in these areas unless we're very clear about the role that water's going to play, particularly in light of climate change and as we get more severe conditions. We know that water enhances the livability of our cities. We need to envisage how it needs to look, we need to plan for it, and we need to make it happen. We know that the greening that water supports, it plays into the mental and the physical health and well-being of our communities. It mitigates and moderates the impact of urban heat. We need to plan for it. We need to embed it into our cities. Infrastructure itself provides the best opportunities for providing access and connectivity within our cities as well. We've got linear infrastructure. Why don't we put bike paths and pocket paths and community gardens and those sorts of things as multiple uses? And finally, water-sensitive urban design. We're not as good at it in New South Wales as we could and we should be. And it's about bringing together water management, urban planning, and making it happen, not just in a few bespoke developments, not just in a few precincts, but across the whole of our city. They say that the future's fiction, but it's our role to actually write that story. We need to be very clear about what we want from our future city in terms of what water supports. We need to collaborate with one another because no one party, no government, no utility, no developer, and no individual community group can make it happen by themselves. And we need to be open to all of the options and all of the opportunities that are available to us and do things differently. Thank you.